Hey, what's happening? What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rounding Off Wrong Channel, Wrong Show. As a public service announcer, reminder that I have to do my initial mic check on myself when the live show starts when I'm hosting, so had to give a brief pause there to get through that. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast, Grown Ups Who Game. This is the GX show for May 2021, part 2, episode number 193. And here with me, co-hosting this week, is Mr. DBqHams. How you doing, DBQ?
I am here. Yeah, no, I'm glad to be here and my mic works, so that's always good. And I feel like it's been a busy month for games. Even though we haven't really had a lot of new releases, but there's been enough to keep us going here and playing.
It's strange. It's strange. There are some weird spikes, and I think this is what we're going to see throughout the year. I don't know that we're going to get the singular monolithic deluge of games. I'm sure we'll get something like that in the holiday season. But still, you have the scarcity of the new consoles, and that has an impact. So it's just kind of a weird schism that's going on. As we do every other week, we're going to be talking about our gamer experience, and we'll be talking about the games that we play. And some of the experiences that we get when we play and some of the people that we play with. And every other week, of course, we do a deep dive on gaming industry news, but that is not this week. This week, like I said, we're going to be doing the gamer experience show. And so at the top of the hour, we're going to hit any new releases that we've been playing. And humdinger! We got one of the big ones. One of the big ones this year in a strange year. Again, a really strange year. We've had strange years in the past. We've had the year where Control was a headlining title, a title from Remedy, which is not the norm. You don't think of them you think of them as this kind of maybe somewhere in between a AA and a AAA studio. So it's kind of weird for them to be the bringers of the big blockbuster of the season. And again, because of the scarcity of the consoles and the weirdness that the pandemic has caused with the development life cycles, we're kind of getting the same things. And what's popped onto the horizon this past week was not Resident Evil Village. That popped onto the horizon, but that's not what we wound up playing. And I think the tail of the tape may very well be that game, which is a pretty short experience, is a 8.5 hour experience, may really not get that much traction with the press, may not get that much airtime when the year is done. Because what we wound up playing is Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which is significantly longer than an 8.5 hour experience, offers plenty of meaty content. And so let's talk through just how much of that meaty content we got through. Why don't you kick us off with that topic, DBQ?
Yeah, no, I have not spent I've spent some time with it, but it's the Mass Effect trilogy, right? To think of it as a new release is kind of disingenuous to a degree because it is still pretty much the game. I've only been playing through the original Mass Effect, so I have, I'm gonna play through, start a different character, try a different build from previous runs through. But it is one of the things that I am noticing is one, how it all feels really familiar, even though the last time I played through the original Mass Effect, it was 9 years ago at this point, a little over 9 years. But still kind of remember those beats, still kind of remember some of the story points, or I remember a lot of the story points, but even the gameplay and the level design, I'm coming back into and it's fitting like a glove. But what I am appreciating about the new Legendary Edition is the gameplay on the original. The original was very much in the vein of the Knights of the Old Republic. It looked like a shooter, but it played like an RPG, right? There were a lot of stats and a lot of rolls going on as you took a shot. And now it is a lot more precise. It feels more precise. You do have the ability, regardless of class, to equip different weapons, which is nice as well.
It was a very rough transition, and it's even still kind of apparent today how rough a transition from a develop and conceptual and artistic mindset it was to go from something that was essentially a turn-based shooter to something that moved constantly in real time and that didn't afford the developers the luxury of that pop and stop action, where kinematics didn't need to look that fluid. Character animations didn't need to look that fluid, and the impact that those would have on combat wasn't, in the past hadn't been something that needed to be taken into consideration. So yeah.
So I mean, it is. I think the other piece of it is I think the word transition game makes a whole lot of sense with it. That it is. There are moments as you wander through the Citadel where it feels very much of the late 2000s in terms of the density of players, the kind of static conversations that you have, the the confined movements that characters have. This is not a big sprawling open world with a lot of moving pieces. Uh, but at the same time, one of the things I still appreciate about the original Mass Effect is you get that grand design. You can see that where they're going with this world. And having finished Mass Effect Andromeda back in March, I guess, uh, I at that time when I finished Andromeda and were playing Andromeda, I felt it had a lot more in kind with the original Mass Effect in terms of its themes and kind of world exploration than it did the much tighter kind of barrel down the corridor aspect of Mass Effect 2 and 3. So I think in some ways that is probably why it feels so familiar. But I am really, I'll be curious to see how that transition plays out. Like if there's any other fluidity that happens as we move into Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 3. I did play some Mass Effect 2 back in February for one of our PickZ plays. So I'm curious to get back into that. But I think this is going to be kind of a long, slow burn. This is going to be my Swiss Guard type of, you know, tapping into it every once a week or so and just kind of slowly moving through that world. But I've been playing on the PC, and one, I played on the PC because I had a uh, long overdue EA Origin gift card for $60 that I needed to use. Well, I could have waited, but realistically, I don't know what else I was going to buy with an EA Origin gift card, and also I had really thought about buying it on Xbox to see what it looked like in 4K. But I appreciate the intimacy that I end up getting because I'm sitting so close. I'm playing on a computer. I and it also that's the way I experienced Mass Effect the first time, and so there's the familiarity and the comfort to that as well. And one of the things that has been mentioned out there in the press and some reviews or at least some gameplay aspects of this is there's not a lot of kind of graphical options and visual controls within the PC version. It's pretty bare bones. And I don't think it's drastically different than what it was originally, but compared to kind of modern PC games, there is no field of view slider. The graphics are high, medium, low, ultra, and a VSync, and that's about it. There's not a lot of kind of granularity that I can tweak to try to get more out of. I can play with, I can cap a frame rate, I can uncap a frame rate, but that's about it. I can't really tweak things to try to squeeze out as much performance as I could.
And this is where it's readily kind of apparent that, as much as I think spiritually people want those games to be, they're not shooters, they're RPGs. And so you don't get a lot of those like finely grained, finely atomized controls, I think. Um, I'm glad that you hearkened it back to I was about to say Bioshock to BioWare's Knights of the Old Republic, because where I am, so I have only played this game on PC, and so in a very strange twist that I would have completely not predicted, you're playing on PC, I'm playing on Xbox, which just looking at the reviews and the ratings is where it seems like people are happier to be. Reviewers have been more congratulatory of the Xbox version. Um, and maybe PC not so much because from a comparison standpoint, like you mentioned, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles and tweaks that allow you to really um, gain the full PC experience from that aspect of being able to control what you see. So I'm playing on the Xbox on the Xbox. I'm playing on the Xbox Series S, so again, that euphoric feeling of the graphical enhancements to me is larger. Like if I was playing on a Series X, I would expect everything to look beautiful, but the Series S just constantly impresses me by like what it's pulling off. And I first played, I was streaming it, and so I at first had it connected to a 25 60 by 1440p monitor, but I was going through a capture card, so I was only getting 1080p, and the game looked fairly okay. But when I ended that streaming arc and moved it back to the 4K TV, then I got to see it in 4K, and it's super impressive. Um,
Is it in 4K or is it in
it
14?
it's the series. My TV doesn't have a 1440p mode, and so I think what it's doing is upscaling, um, which still, again, for the Series S looks incredibly
Sure,
impressive.
and you get the HDR in it, which is,
Right.
the lighting aspect of that I could see where, especially, in a sci-fi game like this, can really shine.
Yep. Yep. So, but where I am is in a place where I had the same problem on PC, and when I bounced off of it, I've done a soft bounce off of it this time, is I'm stuck in the Citadel, because the Citadel, I realize now, is very much like, what is that first? I don't know what that first city is that you get to in KOTOR, but
Yeah,
it's
I can't think of it either, but I can picture wandering around trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go.
yeah. And I don't, is it Coruscant that you land on in? It's not, maybe it's not Coruscant, but it's designed to be the same. It's either Coruscant or it's designed to be. The point is, it's an incredibly large, sprawling area where there's a cornucopia of events, and storylines and dialogue and things to go through. The problem is that's not the point of Mass Effect, right? And so I'm stuck in bogged
You
down.
don't want to run down and do air people on the Citadel? Ah,
Yeah, but I know plenty of people do. But the problem is this is one of Mass Effect's inherent design flaws. Is this predates the notion of something like a Destiny 2 pointer that just tells you where to go. So you don't know where to go. You have to, heaven forfend, you actually have to read the dialogue of what people are telling you. You sometimes have to interpret, because where they say a person isn't necessarily verbatim what it's called on your map. So you have to make some assumptions and gain some inferences. You have to sometimes lay manual waypoints in order to figure out where the heck it is that you're supposed to go. So on the Citadel, but I'm a big boy now. I've grown up, and I realize I just need to go to a guide and figure out how to get out of the Citadel. Because on PC, I bogged down in the Citadel, couldn't figure out the path to get to where you you get to a point where you can go back to the ship and leave the planet. I just stumbled and fumbled through that because that was back in the day where I refused to open something like a guide. Now I'm like, like that's not the reason I'm playing the game, so it doesn't hurt me. So I have looked up a guide, and realized that I need to. I took a fast transit over to one area, and now I need to take the same fast transit right back to the exact previous area, to move on with the story. So that is what I will do. But
so talk to me performance-wise
yeah,
on the S. You're talking about taking transits and the historical loading screens of Mass Effect. How does that play out on the S? And are
it,
you running in performance or in graphics mode? Because I believe the S has that option.
yeah, I will have to check, because I don't remember going again, because I was on the PC and I probably didn't even look for it. So I haven't looked back on the 4K TV. But I would probably at least try, the quality mode first, because again, it's not a shooter, so I don't have the same concern I would have about frames like I would have in a Call of Duty or a Destiny 2. But I will check that out. Um, but no issues. Yeah, I remember just being in the elevator forever, even on PC running on an SSD. Um, but it's short enough that I'm not even consciously, like, I wasn't stuck in the elevator for long enough to even remember or think about that being an issue from previous iterations. So uh, weapon handling in Mass Effect 1, at least in the Legendary Edition, is pretty dope. Um, one of the things is that they don't do a lot of explaining to you about um, weapons management, or or kind of what the progression model is, right? Like you pick up stuff, like and you pick up I'm not sure if they've tweaked the loot frequency, but you pick up a number of weapons, even just on the first mission down to the planet. And I mean, I don't think there's a tutorial in the game, but there's nothing that tells you like the hierarchy of weapons or how the weapons are paired or which weapon you should equip more so than another. You're just kind of presented data and you make a decision. Um, and
I
what
think some of that is probably a new problem because originally you weren't able to equip every weapon. And so you had, depending on your class, you only were able to use certain weapons. And I think that in that, the codex around in that class is where you would get that information.
and that's possible. So I am playing an adept now, and I think I want to say adepts previously weren't able to use sniper rifles, or maybe aren't able to. I don't know. I think they had some
I
weapons
think that's
limitation
right.
for.
Yes. Yep.
I don't think they do now, and so. But what I'm missing now is what I seem to think I remember is that um, it would. I don't know that it was termed a whole new weapon, but like certain weapons were just what I want to call them were just extensible, and so you would get something like an Aurora assault rifle. I can't remember exactly what it's called, and you would get the extensions that would turn it into a sniper rifle, so it would flip back and forth between modes. Is the way I think it worked before, um, and so I've been trying to get like my base assault weapon to go into sniper mode, and that has not been working. But then I picked up a discrete sniper rifle, and then I have it, but I'm like, shouldn't this go back into an assault mode or something? But they're discrete weapons right now, so it would be nice to have like a tree or something that or kind of in the Destiny 2 fashion where you have families of weapons and you can kind of better understand that progression model, but you don't. But that being said, I can often remember that, particularly on that first mission down on planet, when you're um, storming kind of the train area and you have to find all the bombs within a limited period of time, that that the defenders who were dug in there were incredibly difficult to surmount because your weapons handling was so horrible. And so that has been improved. So I was making sniper shots like in the first 30 minutes of the game. I'm making sniper shots like a champ, which is just really I'm really happy with. Um, the powers you get are still kind of a mystery. Like you hit a power, you see a weird glow, but you don't know what the heck it's really doing, right? So, um, use of the powers is a little, not totally intuitive, and then it's also not. I think when I have my NPC set to, or I'm able to select it. I can't remember which, they just apply their skill points on their own. Like I don't have time to manage in the overhead of like managing my own skill points and managing theirs. So, uh, but so far, a pretty good experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's a really smooth trend. I mean, it's a smooth remaster that it a lot of the kind of dice roll rough edges that you were talking about have been smoothed out. It's a very accessible way to get back into a very well regarded franchise that I think either people are coming back to it because they're like me and really enjoyed it the first time, or they're like you and bounced off of it or never had a chance to play it and this is a good way to experience it.
Are you playing Paragon or Renegade?
I think my character is more renegade at this point. Um, she's a ruthless survivor from Earth. Yeah, she is kind of xenophobic, and so she'll, you know, we'll see, right? I mean, I think I've played the original one as kind of my original character who was a little bit of both, and then I played a kind of full renegade and a full paragon run as well, and I so some of it is kind of creating who you think that character will be. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because it's hard to be kind of xenophobic in this game because of the characters, like, and to not appreciate Garrus or Tally as they grow with you during the course of the game.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I am also playing Renegade, so I've smack some people around and rough some people up and said some very callous things to people. So um, we'll see how that turns out. Uh, I do actually, and I may actually buy the game a second time on PC because one of the things I've struggled with on PC is how when I play like in certain resolutions, how the game was just never programmed to scale like that. So if I'm playing on a widescreen monitor, like particularly when I'm driving, like I can't remember what the vehicle is called, but I always think of it as the Warthog.
The
But
Mako.
the Mako,
Yep.
yeah, how like the Mako is just stretched super wide and flattened out. So I'm looking forward to. I may pick it up on PC just to play it on like a really high resolution, like 2560, 1440 monitor, and see how the game looks.
So
Very
why
cool.
did you pick it up on Xbox then?
I'm just. There are times. There are sometimes super specific games that I insist that I. Well, first of all, it's not unusual for me to buy a game on multiple platforms.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
that
that's
is
not new. Yeah.
right. Yeah, that is an increasing thing over the past few years, really since we've been podcasting. Because really, before we like started podcasting, and we started having this weekly conversation, I was a diehard. I buy a game on one platform and that's it, right? Unless it like just goes on like some $5 or $10 sale. But in recent years, and particularly in extending this conversation, I've gotten much more so into buying on other platforms. But generally, there's only certain games or certain game types that I'm really like, at least for the primary purchase, I'm like, that's like Destiny 2. I was like, I'm playing that on PC. First off, and then if I play it on other platforms, fine. Call of Duty, I'm like, I'm playing that on PC, even though I may not start there. But um, in this, but by and large, my interest is in diversifying just to make sure I have enough cool things to play on each platform and get my ROI out of each platform. So Mass Effect starting out on Xbox was, a choice I was okay with. Show the Xbox some love. Hey, let's talk PickZ report. This may be a little short because, quite honestly, I did not do the assignment this week. um, I've played so many hours of the Division 2 and Far Cry, and expect that I will be going back to Far Cry 6 and the Division Heartland. But the PickZ report is our bi-weekly assignment that we kind of give out to each other and listeners and viewers so that we kind of keep the target line moving, right, and don't allow ourselves um, or our viewers and fans to kind of get into a gaming rut and only ever be exposed to your particular taste, but also to keep our gaming relevant with the news cycle because I think that's kind of fun to be dipping your toes into things that are relevant in terms of storylines. So the assignment this past 2 weeks was as follows. Ubisoft says that they are scaling back on AAA games, if you remember this fun bit from a week or two ago. No more 3 or 4 AAA titles per year. I actually wrote that wrong. I think it's no more 8 AAA titles per year or 6 AAA titles. But now it'll probably just be 3 or 4. And then the others that they used to put out, they're going to be pushing those more towards a free-to-play model, games as a service model, and so a lot of games may potentially kind of be on the chopping block from we may not see another single-player campaign-oriented AAA version of games such as Far Cry or Ghost Recon or The Division, as we know the Division is coming out with the Division Heartland. We may this may be effectively put the nail in the coffin. We've always kind of thought that, well, maybe we will see another Rainbow Six single player campaign, but maybe not. It could mean that something like Skull and Bones still gets released, but it may no longer be AAA. They may not put that level of polish and effort into it. In honor of what may be a fond farewell to some of our most beloved franchises from the Big U, at least in their current form, take a go at any Ubisoft title from your backlog. AAA is not necessarily a requirement. So DBQ, was this your first time playing this game, or was this a return to something you'd played before?
So this is my first time for Ghost Recon Breakpoint. I had played Wildlands. I played the beta for Wildlands and kind of bounced off it after a while. Um, played with some friends, enjoyed it, but just it wasn't in my wheelhouse in terms of diving into that type of gameplay. And we did talk about this because I asked about it on Discord because I ended up picking up this game back at the end of December on like a end of the year sale for $5. I mean, this is I yeah, so yes, this is my first time kind of diving into it. It's the first time actually pulling off the shrink wrap of it actually. So uh, had a chance to go in and play some Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Again, this is what 2019, which had a number of updates over the years. Didn't really release great. Had some, it tried to be a looter uh, and a tactical shooter. It had some gear score issues, but over time, with a number of patches, they've come out with an AI teammate patch or an update that allows for AI teammates. And actually, this coming week on the 25th of May, there's a second teammate update that's going to add additional skill points and skills where your teammates will level up and have the ability to have some division like skills and Ghost Recon skills like a tactical drone or a sonar radar device. But yes, this is my first time diving in, played through kind of the first couple missions, and probably wandered off the beaten path more and drove around to see what I could, crash into and how many hills I could climb up and enemy camps I discovered. But I came at it very skeptically because of my experience with Wildlands, and I found myself really kind of enjoying it, and in a way that it's probably going to stay installed on my Xbox. That it is. I don't know that I have the bandwidth right now to dive into it completely, but treating it almost like a tropical GTA and just kind of roaming around and exploring, doing smaller missions, I found satisfaction out of without having to kind of dive into the big campaign yet at this point. But gunplay is tight. Physics are kind of wonky. I could, kind of kite some enemies into a corner and have them, slowly spill out at me. A lot of running around and hiding behind trees. It also ended up initially because I was new to it and didn't know what to expect. I found myself a lot more hesitant about kind of running and gunning. That I played back. I tried to shoot from a distance. Didn't want to get surrounded. I tried to play it more tactically, and it works that way. Whether or not that's the way I'll continue to play it, but it because of that, it became a different experience. Right? It's not Destiny or Call of Duty or even the Division in terms of kind of the cover shooter aspect of tactical gameplay, and it's not a run and gun Call of Duty Destiny. So it felt a little different to me, and I got some enjoyment out of it. So whether or not we see another Ghost Recon, who knows? Or if we see another AAA Ghost Recon and not some type of online free to play aspect, but for the price, I really am finding some value in it, and I think it's back on sale now on a number of kind of summer sales, and $12, $10 to $15 in some places, $9 on the Epic game sale right now. So a lot of gameplay out there, a lot of patches to improve its kind of quality of life. You've played it, haven't you? And did you bounce off it, or was it kind of just in your rotation and then you kind of moved on to other stuff?
So I actually haven't played Breakpoint. I don't think I was. And I'm looking at the Metacritic now. It's 58.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of rough. It reviewed pretty rough. Yeah.
yeah. So I was in like the Ubisoft like early access thing or whatever for a while, and so I'm pretty sure it was Wild. What's the new one? The newest one, Wild Point.
This is the newest one, is Breakpoint. Wildlands was the first one.
Okay. Well, maybe I
So
did.
this is like the island of paramilitary, and Wildlands was South America.
Okay, all right. So I had it backwards. So yes, actually, I have played this in early access. I was really pumped up for it. Um, and then it came out and it just didn't perform well. Um, so uh, help me out because you mentioned some things. You said it's not the division, but being a huge player of the Division Two, one of the reasons I bounced off of it was because that's what I felt like Breakpoint exactly was it was you were going around, you were interfacing with local camps and like breaking people out, and then that was becoming your power base, and it just felt like the Division Two. It felt like the non-urban version of the Division Two, which, having been a person who played the very first Ghost Recon on PC, and then you know whatever iterations it went through on console and on the PC as
Was
well,
it
and
like Advanced Soldier or
yeah,
Advanced
advanced,
Warfare?
yeah,
Something like that.
and
Yep.
so,
Go.
but where you had like you were given like control of like a mule, and drones and other things to enhance your squad. Um, but then you also had to fight through and work with like horrific AI, literally like the worst teammate AI that I've ever experienced. Like it actually caused me to just drop. It caused me to drop that series, and then I think it came back to it maybe two iterations later. But as it transitioned over into the Division Two kind of shtick, I definitely bounced off of it because it wasn't. Ghost Recon used to be a tactical outdoor game that, in its original incarnation, could have actually been like a turn based squad based uh, like a tactical RPG almost, because the movement was so slow and deliberate, and you used to have to move to get across a map. You used to have to move like individual squad members at a time because you wouldn't want to have all of your squad members in motion and get pinned by fire. You'd want to keep some of them concealed and under cover, and then have one person push up and then rotate your flanks up. It was an awesome tactical game of um, very close and akin to real world map movement and squad movement and fire team movement in outdoor environments. Again, now it plays like the Division Two, and one of the things I struggled with, and again, I played multiple iterations of it in early access, is that I'm like, why would I play this and the Division Two, and some of the progression model that was the same as it was in the Division Two just didn't stick the landing. Um, so, I mean, where do you feel like you saw those differences between it and the Division?
So as someone who bounced off of the Division Two after maybe 10 hours, I think the difference for me is the lack of cover bullet sponge shooting. And in some ways, it'd be nice to have that, to hide behind trees or to have the ability to kind of take cover a little bit more. But the lack of that, in some ways, you're absolutely right. It is so much more arcadey than even in some ways than the Division Two, because there's not that cover, because you are kind of just out there, and the tactical aspects are certainly more video gamey than they were in the early Ghost Recon days. You're describing what I remember playing Rainbow Six, right? The original Rainbow Six as well, in terms of that tactical kind of slow movement, planning out story missions and things like that. So I think that where it feels different is the openness. I think a lot of where the Division Two feels limiting to me is that I'm stuck in corridors. I'm stuck in you know in garages and subway stations, where here I can get in a Jeep and drive for a while and run away from a gunfight and stumble into something stupid, or hijack a plane or a helicopter and drive around until I accidentally crash. I think that's where it feels more GTA goofball like than the Division in some ways. It's hard to say that the Division is more serious,
The
but
the, the Division,
the gameplay of it feels less tactical because of that.
yeah, the Division Two definitely suffers from sometimes. There are some times, and I try not to feel toxic about it, but there are times I'm walking across the map and I'm like, this is dumb. Like it suffers so hard from no vehicles, like just to transit from like one area to another, like literally walking across the entire DC Maryland area. Just at some point, it's like, is there no gasoline or anywhere? Like they have gasoline in The Last of Us, right? Like, so
It's the sound. It's too noisy, right? Just
yeah,
give me a bike. Let me
right.
move a little bit.
Right. No, yeah, it suffers from that, definitely. And there was another game that I was gonna compare it to, uh, in terms of that movement and motion. Yeah, and I've dropped it.
But I think you're right, though. I mean, it did definitely get compared to. I mean, it was the same year as a Division Two, where the Division Two was in the spring of 19, and this was in the fall. And for all of our complaining about the Division Two, it certainly launched a whole lot more polished and refined and focused than this game did. Where this felt like, at least from the reviews, because I didn't play it early, from the reviews, it felt kind of a mess. It felt like it tried to be a little bit of everything and never really succeeded in any of that. And maybe, and in true Ubisoft fashion, they didn't stop trying to develop for it. And so it's had multiple title updates, it's had multiple kind of improvements and quality of life pieces. And so coming to it now, 2 years after it launched, or a year and a half after it launched, I'm sure it feels like a very different game than if I would have tried it at the time that you were playing it around launch or even pre-launch.
It felt very much like a dev team trying to find their footing. The sad thing is, because I'm sure it kind of intervened with their kind of creative juices, is it felt like it was like a lot of times, a ton of times, when dealing with technical problems, I go back and forth between whether I'm going to talk to um, a team or a group of people, and I'll be in this mode like I can't walk in here and have us talk about an evergreen space with nothing up on the whiteboard. This is not the group to have that conversation. We will bog down and not get anything done. It'll take us an hour to even get going. So I need to solve for X before I come in the room and start them with that and then let them add on to it. But then there are other teams that I'm like, I can't give them half the answer because they will just not be able to think about how to bolt on to that framework. I have to just let them like start and figure it out on their own. And a lot of times, the same token, a lot of times people will say, "Hey, you know, here's the schedule for the program. We need you to revise it," and I'll just stare at it and I'm not revising this. I'm taking this thing, everything that happened before, I'm crossing it out. It already happened. I don't care, and I'm just going to reset the baseline moving forward. My point of all that being, I think it felt like a team that was hampered because they were told to start with the Division Two's framework and build onto it, and they were like, this isn't the thing. Like, this is a square peg in a round hole, right? And like, it may have been easier to kind of allow them to have started from scratch. It just felt like they were trying to take the Division Twos. I don't know if it's the same engine. I think it is. I think all Ubisoft shares some baseline
I
technology.
don't know if can't remember if it's a Snowdrop engine or not, which is
Yeah.
the Division. I think it can't be because of the way that movement happens. Like,
Okay.
it's got to be somewhat different. But I think you're right. Like, I think there probably was, going back to lots of our conversations this year in terms of progression, that there was some type of mandate of building in progression into this game, building in gear scores and things like that, to have some of that same, to scratch some of that same itch that they found success in with the Division, even though that doesn't necessarily maybe mesh with what they were trying to do with this game.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't know. I may go back and try it out. I may Google around to see if there are some other opinions about there about going back to Ghost Recon Breakpoint, because it felt like good bones, right? It just felt like that last pre-release beta that I participated in, and of course, again, this is like if you see Tombstone before Wyatt Earp, you don't like Wyatt Earp. If you had seen Wyatt Earp before you saw Tombstone, you might appreciate Wyatt Earp a little bit more. But after having played the months of a released version of the Division 2, I was just like, why would I play this? Like, why would I spend the time? The other thing I was going to mention, and then you're absolutely right about the comparison in terms of the Division 2 does suffer. It's really neat, and I think a positive when you think about the Division 2 and how you transition through all the environments, how you transition from outdoors to parking garages, like you said, which is essentially these partial indoor environments, like when you're fighting through apartment buildings that have partially open areas, but then you go back inside, and then when you transition to underground areas that are completely enclosed, that's neat. But the Division 2 absolutely suffers from the sticky wall cover problem, where you like get jammed onto cover, and you're like, I just need to get off of this thing, or you want to you want to pop off the cover and still be in a crouch. And I think in the Division 2, I think one of the problems with the movement into the Division 2 is there is no crouch unless you're on cover, so you can't duck down behind something just from an elevation perspective. You have to be jammed onto it. But then there's numerous times that like you're just trying to like pop off of the cover, but what you wind up doing, there's a transition animation to go around the corner but stay on cover, and that happens like 60% of the time. So yeah, I completely get you. Many times I'm trying to fight a big boss in an enclosed area, and I like try the dodge animation, and it jams onto cover, and I'm like, no.
Yeah, right. Are you getting a firefight in a corridor and you're stuck to a half tipped over table and you're just trying to get away before you're getting hit from behind? Sure. Yep. I mean, I think the last thing I'll say on Breakpoint is there's nothing wrong with a bargain bin game, right? Like coming at this as a $60 game, I probably would have different expectations than coming at this as a sub $10 game. Like, yeah, I'm getting some enjoyment out of it. I'm having some dumb fun. It doesn't need to be a be all end all because I didn't invest a lot of my money into it. And so I can enjoy the time I have with it.
Definitely. Sorry, I got myself confused between the multiple controls here. Hey, I'm realizing I didn't scramble the schedule up beforehand, so we're gonna ad lib here and wing it a little bit on the fly. Let's transition. So that's Pix Plays. Like I said, I didn't complete the assignment. My apologies. But let's get into the regular rundown and kind of go through some of our variety gaming as we were oft to do. And let's pick up with our talk about Destiny 2. As is often the topic on the show. Um, you've been playing, I've been playing. I got bitten by the Destiny 2 kind of, bug, and wanted to get back to my accounts and play across a bunch of different platforms. Xbox. I think I started on PlayStation 5, and then played on Stadia, and then wound up on Xbox, and then. Well, I talked about PlayStation 5 a couple of weeks ago, the last GX show. So since then, I've also played on PC, Stadia, and Xbox. Um, I have only dipped my toes into Season of the Splicer.
Splicer.
Um, not enough. I know. Is this another thing where somebody who was involved with the murder of Kate Six is one of the? No.
No, so this is we take a break from Crow, from Aldrin and his story, and this is completely different. This is a character that I don't know that we've met before, and in some ways, this is I'm enjoying. I enjoy the opening mission and kind of the story aspect around it. I haven't purchased the season pass, so I don't have access to grinding through all the the what do they call them, the overload or whatever, the new team based mission where you've got to open keys up and get loot boxes, get boxes of gear. But the whole piece here is that you're working with some Elixni, the Fallen. These are a group that still worships the Traveler, and that the Vanguard and the Tower, the humans have allowed into the tower and allowed into the city for protection. And you get a little bit of some story about how the Guardians hunt them, and they have you get to see some of this of our repercussions over the last 7 years now, in terms of these being the easy enemies, and how why certain ones are as big as they are and others are small and underdeveloped and kept that way. And so it was as a lore person, it's kind of cool to get in and hear some of the side from what was quote unquote the bad guys in on Earth the first time. And so that's been interesting in that way. Otherwise, it's just another, grind to unlock and upgrade the new, MacGuffin for the season. Every season you have this season, it's a Spicer gauntlet. It's a glove. Last season it was a big old hammer. Before then it was some type of lantern that you would fill up. In some ways, the season aspect of this only only reiterates the grindiness of what the seasons feel like to me. And so I tend not to really engage with that aspect of it. I enjoy the weekly stuff. I enjoy the setting and the gameplay, but I'm okay if I don't totally max out any one thing and just kind of slowly creep my character forward. So, but you've been playing across multiple platforms. Are you engaging with the new season, or still working through some of the Beyond Light campaign, or I think even the more pertinent question is, you've been bitten by the Destiny bug before and have kind of not necessarily burned out, but moved on. Kind of you fade in and out. And what's keeping you engaged this time?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, in the Forsaken campaign, I definitely burned out just because that was more of the structure of the campaign and the weirdness of of those initial bounties with Spider. Just kind of still torque me off to this day. Um, and then was Forsaken where we introduced Gambit.
Yes,
Okay,
Forsaken, we got Gambit.
so and I just wasn't a huge fan of Gambit. Now, having played with you guys through a few sample sets, it's at least an acceptable game mode to me and far more interesting to me than Crucible would ever be. But still something that I would want to play socially with like people I knew. Like I wouldn't go into Gambit with a bunch of randos. And in Beyond Light, there were there were several bounties that were associated with playing in the Gambit mode. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. Um, so but in general, I don't think I burn out on it too much. Um, there are aspects of it that I do, like you said, like not engaging. Like I'm not. I got the Weather Horde that one season. I don't even remember how I got it, but I don't deliberately roadmap.
Gallahorn, you mean, right? The
No,
rocket launcher?
no, it was a season past.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yep.
you know, but it was one of the rare occasions where I'd wound up with like an exotic that actually mattered to me. Um, but but typically, and I don't think I like deliberately tried to find that thing. But generally, like I'm not one of these people who like Googles everything and then like writes down, okay, I need to do these 10 to 15 things to gain this thing, right? It's just if I wind up with it, great. So that part of it I don't engage in, but but in general, as I mentioned in the past, I'm fine with the little stories and vignettes. I like the season always having this little adventure that you go to, and kind of in the same way that I play. That if Call of Duty has a campaign in it, except Black Ops, generally this is actually I think this is the first Black Ops campaign that I've played that I've actually enjoyed. Um, and then what was the Call of Duty sub franchise that never was it? Was it Ghosts that they only did like one iteration of? I
Yeah,
can't
Ghost
remember.
would have been the first one on the
The
PlayStation 4 and Xbox One.
Yeah, the
That
one
was
with
a Sledgehammer. No, that was Infinity Ward. It was the first transition after Respawn, when Respawn shook out. And
okay. It was the one with the two brothers and the dog. Yeah, that
yeah,
one
that
that
was
one.
Ghost.
Yeah, I
Yep.
was not a fan of that. But generally, just in the same way that I play the Call of Duty, like I'm fine if I go into a season and play that little adventure. What I'm not good about is I'm not consistent with it. But generally, I would say the main reason that I float in and out of Destiny 2 is it's just the season pass struggle that we talked about last week when we talked about Swiss's transitions and evolution as a gamer. It's just I wish I'm envious, often of like Cowmaster, um, and envious of Swiss that I wish I could pick one of those two paths and align to it, but I can't, right? So it used to not be a problem because I didn't care about season passes, and I was kind of like Swiss. I was like, I'm not going to subscription game, and I'm not going to do season passes, and I'm going to do one and done, right? But now I do, and now I'm in that struggle of how do I load balance the Call of Duty season pass, the Destiny 2 season pass. Um, Thank goodness I'm out of Fortnite because for a while I was doing that season pass, but then also make time in my gaming life for, um, you know,
Mass Effect for a narrative piece.
right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, or even I was trying to think of like smaller set pieces that are like the 20 to 25 hour game. Like what was the Star Wars game called that Respawn just did?
Fallen Order,
Fallen
Jedi
Order.
Fallen Order. Yep.
Yeah, so that's on Game Pass, EA Play now. I try to dip my toes into that. Um, so I haven't settled on a good paradigm because there's a piece, as I talked about last week, of these persistent universes that I enjoy, and that is a certain comfort food, kind of in the way battle royales are a comfort food for Tau. But I haven't nailed down and figured out. It would be great. I could subsist and live a gamer life on just 5 or 6 franchises, right? That I just played the season passes to and just rotated around them. But but I can't commit myself to them and take myself completely off of the notion of, like you said, like playing a Mass Effect Legends or some of the other games, that we're going to talk about tonight. So
I think that's a really I struggle with that as well. I mean, I think I noticed that this week. Like, really, what I've played the most are my seasons in NBA and Madden in terms of where I spend my rotation. Like, in some ways, I find myself I'll play a night or two of Destiny in order to get my weeklies in. I've been playing with a family member back in Borderlands 3, and kind of knocking out some of those other things, like having the time. And this is where the Mass Effect kind of conversation comes back, is where I don't know that I have the gaming bandwidth to sit down and devote night after night to dedicating to a big narrative game. Like, I can dip in and read a chapter more or less, right? The equivalent of watching an episode of a serial, but not necessarily, binging it on Netflix.
and the problem is those games don't really lend themselves to that. Right, like Mass Effect, I'll never do it, but I'll say it. Mass Effect lends itself to you sitting down and dedicating like several days of your life to playing through that. Um, and other games, like I mean, still to this day, I can remember um, it may have been like it was one of my very early Fourth of July holidays where it may have been after the second kid was born. My wife took off and took the kids, and I was at home because I had some work things going on. But in my evenings, I had enough time to dedicate myself to Galactic Civilizations 2, and I played like 30 hours worth of that game, and I loved it. I've never found a 30-hour block of time to string together um, and play that game again. I'm planning on playing Civilization 6 this weekend, and I'm gonna have a ton of fun. But then I'm gonna be after this weekend, I'm gonna be like, where am I gonna fit that? So um, even if I could, and I've tried recently, we talk sometimes about kind of the way we play and the way we approach game. You know, a year or two ago, after I got out of my Star Citizen addiction, um, it needed intervention and counseling and rehab after that. I tried to like rebuild the paradigm, right? And I came up with that quad chart of like what really satisfies me from a gaming perspective, and I was like, progression models, right? Persistence, and a couple other things. And then I realized that's part of it, but that's not it. So now I'm in this kludge of like there's a little bit of like the season pass thing, there's a little bit of genre specific things that I still love and like flight simulators, racing games, a chance to use my specialized controllers, um, things that take most advantage of my hardware, my high refresh rate, my high frame screens. Um, but then there's those single player experiences and getting time on hardware too. So I've tried to build this eclectic list of like 20 different variables, but I don't know, man. At some point, I would like to be able to like sit down and like script like a week of play or a couple of weeks of play and not feel like there's a thing that I'm leaving out and I'm not getting to, but I haven't gotten to that tight of a control framework yet. Um,
And I think that framework is even more difficult now to feel like you're missing out on something because one, just the plethora of games that we have access to, whether it's through, you know, Game Pass or other things, whether it's through, backlogs that, or just, and balancing that with the desire to explore something new. And as we think about what we purchase every month and how do we rotate that in with kind of those existing commitments or the feeling of commitment, and then the potential guilt afterward as well, right?
right. So the last thing I'll say on Destiny 2 is across all those platforms. And again, I kind of randomly determine which character I'm going to spend time with in some strange point of convergence. I have been playing Warlock on all of the platforms, so I have spent tons of time with the derpy jump. Um, tons
My
of t-
warlock appreciates that. Yes.
tons of times where I like hit that double jump button and then I'm like suspended in air and like the boss or the half bosses just are able to target me, from now till Sunday because I'm in a fixed position while I'm slowly floating down to the ground. Um, but mostly I've been playing Beyond Light and dipping in and out of that campaign. In one of these instances, it was actually really interesting, and I think I may have mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but because we're we're seasoned Destiny 2 players and have been around for so long, um, I didn't realize. So on Xbox, actually, I had to. One of my characters, that warlock was so old and hadn't been touched that it actually wouldn't auto upgrade. And so I selected the character and it was at 969 and it did not. So we've gone through two transitions. You used to get a when you got a new season or a new expansion or whatever, it used to say you can automatic if you so choose, you can
You can do a
automatically
boost. Yep.
yeah, you can automatically do that. Or you could just stay where you are and play through like the campaign stuff. In this instance, and then the new framework is it doesn't ask you. Like your characters are reset at 1100 like when you go to Beyond Light. You don't get any choice or option about it. So I selected that character which was at 969. It did not auto boost to 1100. And so it was just in a very weird place that I can only assume is a bug. I couldn't access the Beyond Light content because the Beyond Light content requires you to be at a minimum of 1100. But the character wouldn't auto boost, and so I could run around in the environment. I also was, immediately just killed by anything that I encountered because I wasn't at the minimum level. So I actually had to trash that character because I was like I couldn't figure out a way around it. I couldn't, and of course all the old content is vaulted, so I couldn't get through any of the stuff that would allow you to get back to anything like a Red War campaign or anything of that nature. I was too underleveled to hit Forsaken, so I had to trash that character and start over. Here's an interesting thing, and it's a thing to maybe consider. Starting a new character for each one of these expansions may be the better way to go because if you think about it, you go through there's a certain level of grind that you go through versus some kind of it's tough for me to nail down. I gotta go back and look at it, but I just felt like there was less work for me to do by starting a new character than than coming in with an old character in that experience.
What a
So
unique experience. I mean, because if you're playing actively or even semi-actively, you get to a spot where toward the end of a season or toward the end of a year cycle, you're not in a bad spot to start the new campaign, right? Like even in Swissguard's case where he's not getting doing all his weeklies or something like that to boost his power, he was still above the 1100, and so it isn't hard to jump in and start that. That said, when Beyond Light came out, and you're in a different spot as well because you haven't merged all your profiles. You still have unique profiles on each platform. Where if you're jumping between platforms and have shared profiles, that changes that dynamic as well. But I did. I kept two of my characters and trashed another and started fresh with Beyond Light, in part because they added back in the Cosmodrome as a new way to kind of ramp you in, right? And that you're right. Doing that, my character starting fresh was quickly above my character that I had been playing with for the last few years, in part because I had gone through kind of the intro missions and picked up enough drops to be able to do that, where jumping in and keeping a consistent character makes that a little more difficult. That is an, I mean, it's an observation for a certain type of the non kind of, I don't know if hardcore is the right word, but the non-committed Destiny player, in terms of somebody who is jumping in and out, who plays and enjoys but plays casually. There is that ramp becomes steeper. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's a thing to consider, right? I often, in going through things like moving and selling houses and like selling cars, I'm just like don't get emotionally attached to those things. Like, hey, look, rip the band-aid off, it'll be over, and you're in a better place, right? Thereafter. Like, so um I kind of feel like this way about a thing. Like, we talked last week about how like my Titan that was on PlayStation 4 that I converted, or that was on PlayStation, that was on
PlayStation
Xbox.
4, but on the original one, right? I mean,
Yeah,
on the original Destiny,
yes,
you
on
had
the
brought
original
over.
Disney. Yeah, I brought over, and now I'm like, maybe preserve that character, but like, pick a class per platform that you're just fine, just trashing and starting over. Um, so I guess the thing that I want to comment on is you've been through this, right? Where I didn't realize it because, again, being a seasoned Destiny 2 player, I had never started over, but the original ramp has been changed. It used to be you just played a shortened version of the original Destiny 1 first mission, but now it's a completely different thing with like different NPCs, and it's a lot of the same environments and some of the same levels even, but those Lego blocks have been reorganized in how they're put together. And so
It's really nice, actually.
yeah,
I mean, I find it the best on ramp to Destiny that they've ever done.
it
Really, I mean,
is.
you still go through that opening mission, but it changes. There's the conclusion of it is different because then it drops you into an NPC back in the Cosmodrome, where you spent a lot of time in the original Destiny, and they kind of give you a series of bounties that work as a great tutorial. They give you, you've got to kill certain types of enemies or kill certain enemies with a certain type of gun, or complete public events. It kind of steps you through all the different types of things that you could be doing in Destiny.
Yep. So it's pretty neat, and it just created a new experience for me. Having played on the other platforms where I'd gone to Beyond Light with experienced characters versus this new experience as if I was a new player coming into the fold. Just was really, really interesting. So we spent a lot of time unpacking that. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so I picked up the new Jason Schreier book, Press Reset. So Jason Schreier, from formerly at Kotaku, now at Bloomberg, uh, has been in the games journalism biz for quite a while. The what the His former book was a lot about failed game projects or struggling game projects. It covered the original Destiny. It covered Diablo 3. It covered Stardew Valley. So this one is more about failed game studios, and it covers Warren Spector's studio that did Epic Mickey. You get 38 studios, right? You get the Kurt Schilling studio. You get a follow-up chapter about Big Huge Games, the Rise of Nations developer that then kind of got folded into to 38 with Kingdoms of Amalur and then broken up. You Surprisingly, there's a lot of time on Irrational, and Irrational, 2K Marin, and all the other Bioshock related studios that took place there. And it structurally, it was interesting because you get the Irrational chapter, but then it seems to tie back into the Irrational chapter a number of other times because other developers kind of come in and out of it. Like they got hired to work on Bioshock as Bioshock Infinite ramped up, but then they went back to another struggling studio. Or in some ways, what I found as I was going through this book is I'd love to see like a family tree, a genealogy of all the developers covered in this, because there's so much cross pollination between these studios, between these developers, in terms of people that have been on things. And I think that's intentional, because a lot of what the kind of overarching theme to this is how challenging the game industry is to sustain, how challenging, and not so much in the, Jason Schreier's written a lot about crunch and about burnout, and we've talked about it here. And this book isn't really heavy handed with crunch until the last chapter, maybe, is really when it gets talked about. But for the most part, it's more about studio burnout. It's more about, or corporate handling of studios. You get you get Visceral, who's in here with Dead Space and with Battlefield Hardline, and kind of how they, you see the writing as the wall as they're describing studios getting people spun out into different places, or having parts of their game taken on by another studio because they're trying to finish up a project, or you're not this, the corporate aspect of EA is not liking the direction that it's going. With Visceral, because they do spend some time talking about the failed Amy Hennig Star Wars game that never really materialized. And then you get a lot of what was really interesting is, like, I know, the broad strokes, or I know the broad strokes as somebody following the games industry for the last 2 decades at this point, right? And you can remember kind of the headlines around this, but what you get is a lot more of the personal narrative aspects of the developers working on these different teams, and working within even parts of these bigger studios, and then hearing what they went off to do. And this is the kind of the smaller games that they went out to develop, and to hear the lineage of who made Enter the Gungeon from Visceral's ashes, and how people came and went, and where they are now, really is interesting in that aspect of somebody who sits on the sidelines and is observes these interactions, but doesn't always follow the lineage of where people have gone. And so the book itself was a relatively quick plot through it, in terms of, in some ways it's written in a way that is designed for a non-gamer to pick up and read, because you do get some back story on the different franchises that it talks about. You get some context if you don't have any awareness of the games industry. So those pieces make it also a quick read, because you don't need the explanation. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably don't, because you know those things. So, but it allows it's very accessible. It's well done. I found it actually a little more engaging than his last book. And it may be in part because instead of being about the game, it's about the people who develop the game. Where in the last one, if you know, some of the chapters were really interesting because I was interested in the game or had context of the game. And if I didn't really care that much about it, it was interesting, but not as engaging. And here, it's much more of a human focused piece than a game focused piece.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because the field and industry I work in has some unique requirements, and so even though kind of like the games industry, like you feel like there are these like thousands and thousands of people who work in it, you will frequently come across the paths of like the same people over and over and over again because there's only a limited number of people who have like this particular skill set, right, and can work in these environments. And so, and then you get a whole thing, and I'm sure the book addresses this. You get a whole thing too of like you have to be very careful of who you treat how because as people move around and go back and forth to companies and companies, you never know when somebody who used to work for you isn't going to be your boss, right, the next time around. And so listening to developers and you hear like on these open source projects and everything, you go through these things of like a developer who worked for somebody and then was a lead developer over somewhere else. So yeah, I imagine there are some things there that are similar. It's also interesting that he keeps coming back to irrational games as one of the things that I think of in terms of irrational games and its place in history. It belongs in that set of what I want to call them. I'm forgetting the term. I don't know why it's not coming to me right now, but you do these all the times in school, but not use cases, but
Case studies.
case studies. Yes, sorry. the, moving the case to be the first word is what flummoxed me. So definitely belongs in that set of case studies, but it's such a weird one because it was successful. Bioshock was a successful franchise. And so we go back and we look at this and we're like, I don't really know. Like when we heard the news that Irrational was shutting down, I'm just like, what? Like, that doesn't make sense. So,
And that's it's in there, right? I mean,
yeah.
it is in there. You get some more with Ken Levine in terms of his dissatisfaction with where they were going, or the fact that they spun up a really big studio for Infinite compared to what it was with the original Bioshock. And it, to hear some of the devs who are in the book talk about it, it changed the culture of the studio and it changed the focus. And at that same time, and we kind of are aware of this from the pressures with 2K, where Bioshock 2 needed a multiplayer, right? Like this was part of what the 2K, kind of corporate mandate was, is that things needed that hook. That was also in the same time as EA's Project $1, $10, or whatever it was, like the online code. So you couldn't do used games. The idea of how do you keep somebody engaged, and all of this is really interesting in the context of what we just talked about with battle passes, right? Like this is the evolution. A battle pass is that answer, right? It is. There's not another way that people have addressed that has been as successful as battle passes. Battle passes are the equivalent of it's the enjoyment out of a loot box without having the Skinner box of wondering what it is, and you have the clear progression, but there's also a reason for you to keep coming back, as you're talking about with a battle pass. Like you feel like you need to keep engaging in it to get your value out of it.
Yes, but concurrently, and it's such a strange evolution. But concurrently, there's a non-punitive aspect if you don't, right? Like the problem I used to have before when there wasn't a battle pass, you go back to Call of Duty when they used to just charge you exorbitant prices just for map packs. And I always felt this with Call of Duty, with Forza, other things like I felt like you had to participate in these unlocks, and there was no reset, and so your friends who right just progressed beyond you, right? And then the 12-year-old kid who spent 80 hours in the game the week, right, would just hammer you like there was no parity. Now, at least with the battle pass, like it or lump it, right? There's a reset, and so it allows those of us who lapse to re-engage and not feel like we've been punished for not playing. So yeah, it's an interesting system. So and I get that aspect too of being someone who's you know has spent part of their career getting closer and closer, getting closer to the flagpole of corporate headquarters, and is now poised to make a hard swerve because, as you mentioned, right, like things built up, built up, built up, built up, and then there's an encroachment on the creative space and the technical space, and you want to get back to something that is more pure. I definitely get that progression arc as well. So I'll cover pretty quickly some other things that I've been dipping my toes into. Um, uh, picked up Art of Rally finally. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would have felt like that would have been a game that I would have picked up at release. Um, but it's not a rally game in terms of the meat of like a Dirt or WRC. It is something different. It's kind of cutesy, from the aspect of what it does. It's an indie title. There are some unique challenges from playing a rally game in that isometric view as a pro. There are also some cons in just that it doesn't offer you that level of depth and engagement that you get from managing a driving team, going through the progression arc of different vehicles, going from season to season. I mean, you progress from season, but there are kind of arcadey kind of seasons. There's a limited depth of the differences in terrain, so you're not managing like tires and settings on the car and whether or not you want a tight suspension or a bouncy suspension because you got some really difficult dirt to traverse versus when you're on gravel and you got to contend with asphalt parts of the track. So um, there's some neat things in terms of like skins and other things like that that you get in liveries for the vehicles. So it's neat. It's a pick up and play kind of thing. Like I pick it up the other night. I picked it up and played for like 30 minutes, and I just put in time on 3 races. And so it's neat from that aspect. I'm just playing with controller. I didn't bother hooking up my wheel and pedals because I don't feel like it offers that depth where I really need to do that. Um, but it's a nice, I don't know what aperitif rated. Like it gets me back. Like look, playing dirt is wonderful, but playing dirt rally is a like put your scuba suit on and just prepare to live in that environment for a few days to really extract anything out of it. And so it's a little more lightweight fare that allows you to kind of dip your toes in, play a little bit. Think about right. It harkens you back to what you do love about the full rally experience, but allows you to get kind of a bit of a taste of that without getting totally underwater. Um, and but you know, and then as you go, let me put that deeper rally game kind of on my radar to unpack in a couple weeks. um,
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's, I mean, it's a beautiful aesthetic. It's almost like a painted aesthetic. But yeah, as I've listened to people talk about it or watched, there is the mechanics are not nearly as arcadey as the graphical style makes it look. But I think from what you're saying is it's an interesting blend. Like it has a little bit of it. It's enough there to kind of wet your whistle, but not enough that you have to kind of invest in all the systems of it. Yeah, interesting.
yeah, and then there's some aggravating things that causes, like there's so there's some I think that there are some deliberate limitations in kind of how it's coded. Like there's a certain amount of pop in, which I don't think by any means is because of my hardware. So I'm like, that's got to be deliberate because there's no way my machine can't handle like that graphics level. And I've heard things that like the developer kind of made it deliberately like that limited thing. And then there's some challenge limitations just in terms of he puts buildings on the course. You're in this isometric three-quarter view, so there are points when you're turning a corner and you go behind a building and therefore you can't see your car or the crowd who might be like encroaching out into the roadway, right? That might be in your way. So it's pretty neat. I'm enjoying it. Also spent some time with Microsoft Flight Simulator. Finally, it's just it's a
Yoke and pedals or
uh,
keyboard joystick?
I did hook up joystick. I will always play Microsoft Flight Simulator with joystick. I do not have kind of a civilianized flight control system, just because 90% of what I play in flight sims is combat oriented. But I will say Microsoft Flight Simulator puts a ton of content in front of you, and it has. I have been thinking about acquiring the. I think it's Um, the Airbus, the A320 Air. There's an A320 Airbus kind of flight control system joystick set that also includes like an expansion. Um, the engine, the throttle control box has two levers, but you can buy this expansion set that gives you four control levers. So when you're flying really heavy jetliners, so I have been thinking about picking that up because that kind of allows it has a style that would allow you to do both combat oriented stuff and Airbus oriented stuff. But right now, I'm just flying a King Air Beechcraft. I think it's a 350i. You can go in there. The point of this, for me, in my experience, has been I'm not necessarily gonna set the flight to give me a ton of like instrumentation failures in the course of a flight and try and like work through all those things. I mean, if I were going for my pilot's license, sure, but that's not the point. Um, but I play it to play like around geographically with places I've actually lived or traveled to, and to kind of fly some of those flight paths, and just see the terrain and things like that. But for me, right, in the way that we talked about Rainbow Six and Ghost Recon just now, I probably spend a lot of time in the meta, and I spend a ton of time doing flight plans, and picking runways and orientation and like just planning. Well, I don't really want to fly out of the. I never fly out of like the main airport. I always choose like these small municipal airports, and then I'm like, can this aircraft take off from that airport? Can I land there? How do I need to make this a multi-leg trip so I can stop and refuel? And so I kind of do deliberate things like that, and I spend probably half as much time flight planning as I do flying. So that's been pretty cool. And then the last thing I'll mention in wrap up is then I've been playing a ton of World of Warships. So I've kind of transitioned from that Destiny 2 uh, fetish and getting into that, back to World of Warships. So I've been spending time with my Soviet fleet, which is probably my most junior fleet, and I have picked up a theme that I'd started the last time I was playing World of Warships, which is spend more time managing my captains, which I think I've discovered that part of the strategy in progression is that people, I've just put a new captain every time I buy a new ship, and therefore you know each captain only gets like 1/50th of the experience that maybe I should be compiling into each commanding officer, and so now I'm just using like two captains per nation flag, and then moving them from ship to ship as I gain each type. So I have the least progression forward in my Soviet fleet. I think I just got up to like a tier 4 battleship. Um, with those, and like I said, I'm compressing myself to two captains and really paying more attention to their skill progression. So that's been pretty neat. Anything else from a gameplay perspective, DBQ, that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we've again had a lot to talk about, which is always appreciated. So
Very cool. Very cool. Let's close out by briefing everyone on our next picks plays. With the recent release of Subnautica 2 Below Zero, it's a keen time to think about the resurgence of the survival game genre over the past few years. A nearly dead genre, the class has seen a return to gilded times with the likes of not only Subnautica but also No Man's Sky, Don't Starve, Valheim, Ark, and Grounded. Oftentimes maligned for being too inductive of anxiety, there is a joy to be found in the genre for those of a particular ilk. Hit the genre hard, or pick something that you feel renders similar effects and argue your case about survival adjacent games. I know that's what mine falls into. DBQ, what are you planning on playing for this assignment?
So I think I'm gonna play Drake Hollow, which is kind of a survival tower defense game. It's by the Molasses Flood team, the team that did Flame in the Flood. It is also a studio that was featured in Jason Schreier's book because it spun out of some Bioshock developers, and it's also on Game Pass. So I think I'm going to pick that up. We'll see. And if I bounce off that, I'll probably dive into the free survival game that's on PS Plus this week or this month with Deep Stranded. So kind of stuck on a desert island. So got a couple options. Looking through what I have available and thinking how it ties in with what I'm learning in terms of smaller development studios and where they've come from.
Very cool. Public service announcement and a reminder to me as well to go get those free games on PlayStation Plus. That's often a thing that I have become less diligent about over the years. I'm going to be playing Metro Exodus Complete Edition on PC. I don't know if I bought this or it's just something that I claimed on Pro on Stadia. Played it, plays pretty decent on Stadia, and I was super impressed. The most enjoyable, and I've played a little bit of every Metro um, instantiation in the franchise. Exodus plays remarkably smoothly in comparison to those two, and just kind of how the movement, I mean, is not the movement in the previous two iterations was not too far away from like the tank kind of mechanics of Resident Evil, but a lot more fluid in Metro Exodus. Really looking forward to playing this natively on PC on Metal. And so I'll pick it up. I'll pick it up from either the Epic Game Store or Steam now that the complete edition is out and it's been enhanced with 4K and yada yada yada. So looking forward to that survival game because it has the meta of the gas mask that you have to manage your time in. Next week is a deep dive episode with Towmaster99 at the helm, backed up by Swissguard as co-host. So we will be doing a complete swap. You won't see DBQ or I next week, pending any staffing issues that come up for people and their schedules, which we few members with a lot of things in motion, so that's always a possibility. And that's going to do it for us for tonight. On behalf of myself and DBQ and the E2KG network, it's been wonderful and enjoyable to have you as always. Thanks very much, Orcalise, for swinging through the live stream and the chat. We appreciate you as well. For anybody out there watching the archive version of this show on the E2KG network gaming podcast channel on YouTube, we appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the channel. I always mess it up. To like the video, you can't like a channel. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever we post a new episode. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk about the games that you love. On behalf of myself and DBQ, that's going to do it for us. Good night, good luck, and good gaming. We are out of here.